So this is Otto Fenichel Presents. Good evening. I'm Shonni Enelow, and tonight I'd like to present to you a television series, Otto Fenichel Presents. This is not a contemporary television series. It aired on a local network in Topeka, Kansas, over 1 month in the winter of 1947, after which it disappeared from the airwaves as inexplicably as it had arrived. I have exhumed it here with the help of my boyfriend, Michael Garofalo, and Dr. Otto Fenichel, a real live dead Austrian psychoanalyst, the host of the series, who had, at the time of the broadcast in 1947, recently deceased in Los Angeles. Why he chose Topeka to air his noirist self-investigations is, like much regarding the series, totally inexplicable, except for the fact that 10 years earlier, Topeka had been the first landing pad of his interminable United States exile. This, unlike most aspects of the television series, is not as random as it might seem, for in the 1930s, the Menninger Psychoanalytic Clinic in Topeka was the best psychoanalytic clinic in the country. In the early spring of 1938, Fenichel left Europe and stopped in Topeka en route to Los Angeles. But to the best of my knowledge, he did not return in the 10 years following and did not, therefore, encounter my grandfather, Alan J. Enelow, who worked as a psychiatrist at the Menninger Clinic from 1946 to 1950, after which he, like Otto Fenichel, relocated to Los Angeles. In 1947, as Otto Fenichel's series was transmitted through the airwaves from the afterlife to Topeka, my grandmother gave birth to my father, her first child. Otto Fenichel walks across the television set. Otto Fenichel. Good evening. I'm Otto Fenichel. Tonight I present to you a television series titled, transparently enough, Otto Fenichel Presents. On this transparent enough television series, we will talk transparently about ourselves. We will abandon professional distance. We will banish etiquette. We will exile politesse. We will expatriate tact. We will deport circumspection. We will expel delicacy, diplomacy, and discretion. We will attack, capture, and dissect our personal narratives as if they were so many native tribesmen in the ethnographic research department of our psyches. And I, Otto Fenichel, a real live dead Austrian psychoanalyst, will be your host. Montage. Otto Fenichel and his mother in a painting by Klimt. Otto Fenichel as a bourgeois youth in a Viennese coffee house. Otto Fenichel in his glasses by candlelight. Otto Fenichel surrounded by brown books. Otto Fenichel in a silken cell. Otto Fenichel in blue. Otto Fenichel with the eyes of Buster Keaton. Otto Fenichel on a steamer in an awkward chaise lounge. Otto Fenichel on a crowded pier. Otto Fenichel is attacked by pigeons. Otto Fenichel does not own sunglasses. Otto Fenichel draws closer. Otto Fenichel in silhouette. Cut. The mystery of Otto Fenichel's television series is not to be solved in his biography. He was born in 1897 to a quite normal family of Jewish lawyers. As a young man, he was an active member in the Viennese youth movement, a cross between the Boy Scouts and a free love commune. To him, as to many young people of the 19-teens and 20s, psychoanalysis seemed radical and sexy, aligned with social freedom. It's still possible to read psychoanalysis this way, of course, or like a Gothic novel. Grotesque inner turmoil and psychic landscapes and unnatural desires. As many have noted, Freud's case histories read like detective stories. The patient is in a bizarre, uncanny, tormented state. The endless detective, with precision and savvy, roots out the secret problem and displays it before our eyes. But Fenichel was a Marxist as well as a Freudian, and so he believed in history. He didn't think there was any contradiction. Social environment obviously causes neuroses. But some psychoanalysts were determined to leave environment completely out of the equation. They were describing universal human truths, they thought. Freud himself had left the question open. Was psychoanalysis a science or a discipline of the humanities? Was it describing biological fact or historical culture? These were rich and complex debates, and people were having them. However, in the early 1930s, with fascism on the rise, many psychoanalysts concluded that divorcing psychoanalysis from politics was the only way to save their science. But then politics attacked, and all the Jewish analysts, which is to say a great number of the psychoanalysts in Europe, had to flee. Otto Fenichel went to Oslo, then to Prague, then to the United States. You would imagine that the events in Europe would at least partially corroborate his belief that social environment had something to do with psychology. But in the United States, psychoanalysis was finding its legitimacy by emphasizing its scientific nonpartisanship, and no one was interested in wedding it to Marxism or any other leftist ideology. And so, while in exile, Otto Fenichel began writing a circular letter to his leftist colleagues scattered across the globe, a letter known as the Reinke. Cut. A word from our sponsors. The Ballad of Otto Fenichel, to be set to music by Kurt Weill. Sung. A band of analysts of the second generation who shared Otto Fenichel's cultural and political preoccupations criticized the Nazification of the German Psychoanalytic Association. In a series of circular letters, the Rundbriefe, Otto termed them, they tried to find a middle way between Freudianism and Marxism. They condemned and they admonished psychoanalysts with no respect for the social, and foolish Marxists who ignored the undeniable fact of the individual. Shame on you, Otto Fenichel, but who knew Otto Fenichel when your time was through, Otto Fenichel? For as the years and war sped on through Mays and then Decembers, the other group members did not honor their commitment to remember. By the 1940s, Otto Fenichel was in despair, exiled in Los Angeles, where no one seemed to care. To top it all off nicely, his Viennese training meant a zip. In the American medical establishment, he couldn't get a grip. What's the use, Otto Fenichel? That quixotic point of view, Otto Fenichel, sure has become taboo, Otto Fenichel. Began medical school all over again at age 45, put to work on the night shift, he wasn't much alive. Can we really wonder why he barely lived the year, died of a ruptured aneurysm after 48 long years? Here's to you, Otto Fenichel. Don't be blue, Otto Fenichel. Disappointment looks so good on you, Otto Fenichel. Cut. Otto Fenichel in train compartment, surrounded by browns and heavy fabrics, staring out the window at Oklahoma. Cut. The train arrives in Topeka. Otto Fenichel gets off. A young woman stares at him through the window. A tall man in a gray hat greets him. They are walking away. Cut. A lecture hall full of slightly rumpled people. Otto stands in the front of the room behind a lectern. He puts on his glasses and shuffles some papers. Some ambient crowd noise rises and falls. Otto Fenichel. Good evening. I'm Otto Fenichel. Thank you for inviting me to speak. Cut. My father has only one memory of Topeka, where he lived until he was 3, and that is of getting lost on the Topeka city buses. He had gone out shopping with his mother, and as they waited in a crowd of shoppers for the bus to take them home, David was separated from Mary and swept onto a bus leaving the station. David, displaying at 3 the stoicism and equilibrium that would in later years develop into an omnipresent philosophical calm that I have not inherited, did not panic or even cry when he realized that he was not with his mother, but simply got off the bus at the next stop and got onto the next one, reasoning to the best of a 3-year-old's abilities that surely if she were not on one bus, she must be on the one after. And so my father traversed the city of Topeka, getting off one bus and onto another, until it began to get dark, when finally someone asked him where his mother was. Only then did he start to cry, as if it suddenly struck him that he had not, in fact, been on the lovely solitary voyage his imagination had assumed, but rather was a missing child, a pitiable creature deserving a stranger's care. Voiceover. I would like to make it clear that I do not see my personal struggles as of the slightest significance to the world, except insofar as they speak to a general social condition that it is my belief must be rectified. I have indeed felt an increased sense of hopelessness and anxiety as regards the course of the human psyche and of Western civilization in turn. I am ashamed of the callousness of my contemporaries to the pitiful situation of so many. I would, however, suggest that my talents, meager as they may be, would be better used elsewhere than the night shift as a resident at the Cedars of Lebanon Hospital. Episode 3, Los Angeles. Otto Fenichel. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Otto Fenichel, and I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome you latecomers to my series, Otto Fenichel Presents. Tonight's little frolic is not about a murder. I'm very sorry. No, tonight's play is about another kind of madness. Have you ever felt that if you were two people? I do. I think I'm a monk in the 12th century painting manuscripts all day. Don't you? No? Well, no accounting for taste. Speaking of taste, tonight's delectable culinary adventure follows the story of a young woman driven insane by inner forces outside of her control. Tonight's little tale is called A Woman in Los Angeles. Scene, Los Angeles. A scene from a movie about Los Angeles. A scene from a movie about Los Angeles which was not shot in Los Angeles. A scene from a movie in which Los Angeles is somewhere else, or the future, or the desert. An autobus with a long tail of smoke. Los Angeles in German. Scene, a grand mansion set into a wooded area in Brentwood, Los Angeles. A curving driveway. The music swells, then quiets. Children's laughter. Interior shot, a grand staircase, heavy drapes, vaguely oriental-looking furnishings, brocades, a tracking shot up the staircase into the master bedroom, where a young woman in a dressing gown lies in a vast white bed. Woman. Darling! A man enters from the bathroom, a towel draped around his neck. Man. Yes, what is it, darling? Woman. Do you have to go to work today? Man. Well, yes, you know I do, dear. Woman. It's just that I'm frightened, Eric. I'm frightened of, I don't know what. I just know something terrible is going to happen. Maybe it's this house. Ever since we moved from Kansas into this terrible Californian house, I just feel as if I might just go to pieces. She weeps. Cut. After leaving Topeka, my grandfather and grandmother moved into a large house in Los Angeles in a part of Brentwood called Mandeville Canyon. In photographs, he is wearing a short-sleeved collared shirt and a tie. He works as a psychiatrist at Mount Sinai, or Cedars-Sinai, previously known as the Cedars of Lebanon. My grandmother stays at home and has 6 children, and it is very difficult for me to imagine her mindset during this time. Cut. Man. Now, dear, you know nothing terrible is going to happen. Why, you've got Millie right here to stay with you all day. Woman. Oh yes, Millie. However did we find such a wonderful housekeeper? But darling, I know you don't like to hear me talk about it, but I just have this horrid sense that there's something wrong in this house. I feel as if it were haunted. Did you hear that? Man, what? Something coming from that closet! This closet, darling? He throws open the door. Nothing, a neat line of suits and dresses. But I could have sworn. Now, dear, you're just feeling a little under the weather. Yes, I'm just feeling a little under the weather. Well, you know how to reach me if you need to. I'll be at the hospital seeing patients all day. Now try to be good, darling. No whipping up wild fantasies while I'm gone, Yes, dear. I'll be good. The man exits. Woman in voiceover. I know it's haunted. I just know it is. See, I can hear something. Something is here with me. I know someone is, but how can I be sure? I'll get up. I'll go into the closet. I can do it. I must do it. I can't be crazy. It must be real. She gets up slowly and walks in a trance over to the closet. She grabs the handle and throws open the door. Suddenly, the bedroom is transformed into a parlor where a lively cocktail party is going on. There is old music swaying by Mr. Shane. The woman wanders through the party in her dressing gown. Montage. My grandmother is a child in a starched dress, standing outside a mansion in Riverdale. My grandmother defending herself from childhood disgrace. She didn't destroy it, she merely looked at it. She is Mary, quite contrary. She is the second youngest and forgotten. My grandmother on vacation being photographed. My grandmother as an English major at Vassar. She got very bad grades. My grandmother with conviction. My grandmother joining the army. My grandmother marrying my grandfather. My grandparents ordering mint juleps at the King of Prussia Inn. The cocktail party becomes frenzied, frenetic. People stand on tables. It's Weimar Germany. There's eyeliner and drugs. The man hands our heroine a cocktail in a crystal glass. and a woman who looks exactly like her, but in an evening gown with brown bobbed hair, rushes across the room. Woman, what is this? Where am I? To a slightly tubby, middle-aged gentleman with glasses. Sir, please. Otto Fenichel, with a thick Austrian accent. Yes, what is it? Woman, where am I? Otto Fenichel, you're in Los Angeles. Woman, I know that, but where? Otto Fenichel, don't you know? You're at the home of a wealthy woman whose husband is a doctor at the Cedars of Lebanon Hospital. But I'm that woman! No, I'm afraid you're confused. Our hostess is right over there. He points to her doppelganger. But that's me! You do look alike, it's true, but that's not so unusual. What's wrong with her? What? They look over at the woman. Her skin is pure white. Her dress is red, it becomes her skin, the room is dark. But she is dead? But of course she is. We're in the 1930s. We're all dead. No, it can't be. No. She runs to a door on the side of the room and flings it open. Suddenly, she's lying on a couch in an office. Otto Fenichel is sitting in a chair beside her, scribbling on a notepad. And then? Woman, that was all of it. Otto Fenichel, I see. Woman, but you see, this is a feeling that has plagued me throughout my life, doctor. The feeling of being two different people, of not knowing which one is the real me and which one the fake. And the real one being something horrible, a dead thing, something who died a long time ago. But it can't be, it's too horrible. Won't you help me, doctor? Won't you tell me what it all means? She writhes on the couch, tossing and turning. Won't you tell me what it all means? The image fades, and she is lying in bed again as she was at the top of the episode. Please tell me what it all means. Her husband rushes in. Darling, what's the matter with you? Oh, Eric, I'm frightened. Don't be frightened, darling, I brought a doctor. Otto Fenichel answers. Oh, it's you! She faints. Cut. Otto Fenichel. Now, ladies and gentlemen, our heroine tonight is not as deluded as she might have appeared to you, transmitted through the airways of your pleasure tube, the television. In fact, she suffered from something which pre-psychoanalytic psychologists call dual personality. Her inability to integrate the different parts of her life led her to invent magical connections between them. This process of isolation often occurs in patients who have undergone traumatic experiences that they wish to separate from the rest of their lives. In fact, this particular woman suffered from manic depressive disorder, but from our little playlet, one might deduce that she was merely pathologically afraid of the dead. One might come to the conclusion that the cocktail party was an hallucination of a dead world, a gone world, a society that is no longer. Montage. The beautiful house is in shambles. The children are silent. My grandmother on the cutting room floor. She is diagnosed with manic depression, a doctor's pad. The television flickers. She's in a hospital. The bed is white. My grandparents divorce. My grandfather takes the children. Montage, very quickly, a fire hydrant, a car driving fast around a curve, broken glass, 4 girls in an upstairs bedroom, Venice Beach, the light on the ceiling, the spiral staircase, the effect of the real. Episode 4. Otto Fenichel. Do you believe in ghosts? Of course not. I knew you didn't. Neither do I. I'm a man of science. That's why I came to Topeka where there are no ghosts. But I couldn't stay. So instead I find myself in Los Angeles, and the only thing to do seemed to be to host a television show. Cut. The television goes dark. The television flickers. The television transmits from the past. A woman lies in a hospital bed, tossing and turning. I must have been different. Scene. A bar. Bartender. The usual, Miss Enelow? Shonni. No, bartender, I think I'll have a whiskey. Oh, doctor! A middle-aged man has entered the bar. Doctor. Yes? Shonni. I was wondering if you would have lunch with me today, doctor. I'd rather appreciate it if you could. You see, I have something very important to discuss with you. About some friend with a psychosis? No, it's not a friend. It's myself. Well, thanks very much, Ms. Enelow. I'd be delighted to have lunch with you. Thank you, doctor. Now, I want this on a professional basis, doctor. I want you to send me a statement. I want to do this correctly, doctor, nothing under the table. And I will come to your office, doctor, and lie on the couch if that's necessary. The fact is, I need your professional help. You don't know much about me, doctor. In fact, there really isn't much to know. I'm a normal person, doctor. Nothing special about me, really. I'm 28 years old. I'm a graduate student in literature. I live alone in a small apartment in Brooklyn with one servant, Peterson. Nothing at all unusual about me, really. Cut. Otto Fenichel gets out of bed. It is dark. He opens the icebox because it's the 1930s and he doesn't have a refrigerator. He goes to the window. Cut. Shonni. Except that I believe I'm suffering from a peculiar kind of ailment, doctor. And it is a kind of ailment that I think your psychoanalysis was designed to cure or to combat. You see, it's a problem of narration, doctor. Cut. Otto Fenichel walking down Wilshire on a bright morning. He is going to the department store to buy a tie because he has been invited somewhere and feels glad. I am also going to the department store, but for the opposite reason, because I feel lonely. Otto stops in front of the windows to look at the displays. We reach the swinging glass doors at the same time. Cut. Otto Fenichel gets up from the dinner table. He is impassive, he is stoic. He goes to the living room shutters and stares out with his hands in the back pockets of his pants. I am sitting at the dinner table because I am a teenager and I am an asshole. It's a new thing and I surprise myself. He is looking out the shutters. Cut. Today television and other entertainment media collapsed time. But before the 1950s, most television was like theater. It was broadcast live, it wasn't recorded, and either you saw it that once or you didn't. What was collapsed was not time, but distance. Austria could be in Brooklyn, Brooklyn could be in Los Angeles could be in Topeka. But soon most television was taped in advance, and then what was collapsed was time, which was how Otto Fenichel could transmit something from after his death in Los Angeles to my grandparents in Topeka. Of course, my understanding of this history is purely speculative. I understand it through my own experience. I use a collage of images, ideas, photographs, a plot I know, a story I imagine, and my attachment to these people, which is a form of transmission, a cable or a wire or a cord, from one world to the other. Cut. It is snowing. Otto Fenichel puts on his boots. He is staying with a friend for the winter. His friend has gone out to a party, but Otto is not feeling well and stayed home. But he is restless. He decides to go for a walk. The streets are empty except for a black car driving very slowly, and occasionally another person staggering. It is snowing so furiously, Otto Fenichel can barely see. Rundbriefe. Dear colleagues, on Thursday, December 3rd, 1939 at 6 a.m., I began the experiment of being happy. I had just returned to Los Angeles after 2 weeks in New York, and I was determined to have changed in a small but consequential way. And in thinking about how it was I was going to have changed, I realized that there was a kind of theme running through my experiences while I was away, two events that could be linked together as a theme anyways, and that theme had to do with lightness, with living lightly. The first of these events was in Manhattan, where I stayed for a few days with an old friend I had known as a student in Austria. My friend made an offhand remark about my lightness, légère in French, or gai for cheerful. He said it as a means of contrasting my mode of living with that of another acquaintance, who is in almost exactly my position, exiled, as they say, in Los Angeles. But I am lighter than he is. It seemed true. But as I turned the phrase over in my head, I began to wonder what exactly lightness in that context means, what sort of lightness he was talking about, its contours and edges. Is it just a way of interacting with other people, of paying attention to what they want to talk about and the way they want to talk about it, and reacting in concert, of smiling and laughing when they want you to smile and laugh, of giving off the appearance of complete commitment to the conversation, of flattering them with your interest and delight? Is it rather a way of turning towards one's own life, its paths and occurrences, of treating them lightly? The former is familiar enough, but that I could be considered to possess the latter form of lightness is surprising and upsetting, because although it is possible that I give off a different impression, I am very bad at treating the events of my own life with anything but severity. This is most evident to me in my professional life, which I privately feel to be a series of utter failures, about which I am almost never able to laugh authentically. This lack of true lightness, for lightness towards oneself seems more important and profound than the other kind, struck me deeply, although in two phases, the first immediately in Manhattan, in my friend's sun-filled and impeccably decorated apartment, and the second in Topeka, where I stopped on my way home to Los Angeles. Immediately upon disembarking the train, I was struck by it, the combination of the quality of light and the pale colors of the landscape, so bright and yet opaque almost. I thought about this light constantly while I was in Topeka, and the contrast between it and the harsh light and darkness of Manhattan. And also, more subtly and profoundly, I thought about my own disjointedness with that landscape, the disconnect between what I was seeing and how I was feeling at the time. It was like I could see through the bright, delicate sunlight, or somehow sense what was behind it or under it, which was a long, low, somehow solid shadow, which was me. And so this lightness, in my memory, becomes the living lightness that I lack. The light became the figure for my longing for private lightness, for shedding weight, for a new birth.
What makes a beach gay? The individual grains of sand are aware of themselves as scopophilic objects, self-consciously and rigorously inserted into a semiotic regime they may claim as their own. The individual grains of sand arrange themselves into pleasing tableau, always aware, for example, of the impact of a striking diagonal against the rigidly horizontal horizon of sky against lake. What makes a beach queer? There is no possibility of a queer beach, although autonomous pockets of queerness may establish themselves in any terrain. Queers hate diagonals and try to remain always at right angles, lumps arranged in irregular grids. A queer lump, never soft, never hard, will not agree to be a mute scopophilic object. Gay time is dilated, like a sphincter is predisposed to be. In photojournalism and street photography, the documentary photographs of Doug Yashar's Marginal Waters are a kind of end of the street photography. There is the decisive moment that captures a specific occurrence at just the right time, at the apex of that event's narrative arc. But there are no gay events. Gay life is not a softball game or a war. It is episodic rather than narrative, but the episodes are static, without incident or development. There are no conflicts and no resolutions. Gay life does not reproduce. It merely endures. It is not a series of continuous actions, but a sequence of discrete poses. This is how Deleuze argues the same point in his cinema books. Movies are gay, Hitchcock goes both ways. Gay life has no conflicts, but is full of attractions and repulsions. One moves toward or away from something based on one's arbitrary, though highly refined, faculty of taste. Gay life, which often occurs largely in gay time, is a day at the beach. When one attempts to narrativize gay life, one corrupts gay time, and nothing good can arise from the distortion. Case in point, Oscar Wilde's most unfortunate mistake, the picture of Dorian Gray. In reality, gay reality, neither the human nor portrait, between which there is very little difference, age at all. Wilde's attempt to narrativize the exquisite equipoise of flesh to painting produces distasteful results. The tragedy of picture, of course, is that a perfectly acceptable painting is subjected to the heterosexual regime of teleological time and is thrown into bestial chaos, the night of all seething things. Time is uncivilized. Events are unnecessary. The second piece is a monologue from a section of my video, Hobbit Love is the Greatest Love. In the video, this section is called Thusly Spaken, but for some reason in the book, I called it Note on My Immigration, probably to link it up with the previous piece called Notes on My Immigration. So Chicago, all of Cook County really, has a pretty good artist in the classroom program that I was part of this year. They always have a shortage of people for the primary grades, so I happily went there, where the little humans are anyway more fresh. I wanted to be placed somewhere on the north side, maybe even here in Evanston, where I thought they'd have better crayons and stuff. But instead I got a south side posting. It turned out the crayons were fine there. Really, it's Crayola everywhere. They've kind of got a monopoly. Anyway, my plan was to get the kids to illustrate Nietzsche's Thus Spoke Zarathustra. Just as Swift's Gulliver's Travels became, over the course of, say, 120 years, a book for children, so I predict will Thus Spoke Zarathustra be a children's book by 2040. None of his other books, obviously, just Zarathustra. So, in a way, I'm just trying to stay ahead of the curve. My plan was to take the children's drawings and animate them. It turned out, though, that they didn't really have the skill or patience for the kind of frame-by-frame pictorial consistency animation requires. And anyway, I was shut down before we could really start. I rescued only a single image I am not authorized to reproduce. It's called the blind necrophile. And it's a bit longer than the other two pieces. I was consulted by a blind man of 32, G, previous analyzed for a short time by another physician. The patient was born almost blind, and at the age of 4, his eyes were removed. He was brought up in an institution for the blind, and although he received only a high school education, gave the impression of a person much above the average in education and intelligence. He came for treatment because he was obsessed by the idea of killing someone in order to get a dead body. He liked very much the smells of perfumes, of grass, of flowers, and of soil, chiefly because these smells stimulated his appetite for dead bodies. This perverse craving began in early childhood when he used to sneak away from the family and go into the cellar, where he would search for garbage, manure, and dead mice and rats. As he grew older, he preferred to play with little girls because his blindness handicapped him in his competition with boys. Early in boyhood, he developed the habit of grasping little girls, kissing and hugging them. He soon knew that he wanted as much contact as possible. Hence, he selected those girls who were taller and stouter than himself. But as he frequently encountered a resistance to his advances, the thought occurred to him, if they were dead, they could not object to my company and my behavior. He did not simply wish to kiss a girl. He followed a definite procedure. I would hold her tight, standing face to face. I would put my lips against hers and would breathe in when she breathed out, and vice versa. At a very early age, he had dreams of finding dead female bodies in the cellar. As he grew older, he had fantasies of fat, tall women, either dying or dead, whom he could hug and kiss to his heart's content. The desire for hugging and kissing women became stronger and stronger in boyhood. He took every opportunity to hug his mother and sisters. They soon recognized or sensed that his behavior was abnormal. When they repulsed him, he would say, if you were dead, I could kiss and hug you as much as I liked, and you could not refuse. When he matured and recognized his monstrous desire for dead girls and women, and the dangers that went with it, he displaced this desire to dead animals. His description of what a dead woman would offer him reads like a gourmet's idea. He dilated upon all delicacies of decayed flesh, how to cure it to bring out the odor, etc. But as the smell of a human body would attract too much attention and subsequent discovery, he finally decided to be satisfied with a dead horse. At first, he knew no particular reason for selecting a horse. He thought the bigger the animal, the more carrion. But where can one get a dead whale or elephant? Moreover, the scream of the horse, like the scream of a woman, gives him a mixed feeling of fear and pleasure. For many years, the horse played the most important part in his fantasies. His great fantasy was to have a secluded farm and the horse, give it indigestion, and finally kill it. The fantasies always revolve around a mare, which he imagines mating with a stallion in order to get her pregnant, and then kill her when she is about to foal. As the mare is a substitute for a woman, the following quotation is quite significant. I often think what fun it would be to see a baby horse lying on the breast of the dead mare and trying to drink milk. Then the body bursts open and the foal has all it wants to drink. I have also thought the same thing of a dead woman and a baby on her breast. His dreams are full of such wishes. He shoots a mother bear after she gives birth to her cub, while the latter lies on her breast drinking milk. In his waking state, he has fantasies of drinking milk directly from a cow's udder, to which he vaguely associates that when about 3 years of age, he fooled around with cow's udders and was thrown down by the cow. One of his frequent fantasies is to get a farm, starve or kill all the animals, and then indulge himself in the manner described with the remains of dead bodies. If caught, he would ask the court to punish him by confining him with a dead body until he died from the effects of the odor. Without going any further, we can say that this patient's great need was to be able to wallow in the slimy carrion of dead female body. He was not only coprophilic, but also coprophagic. He often devoured horse manure and on occasion his own excrements. In trying to put his fantasies in operation, he thought of wallowing in a manure heap. But as this was impractical, He thought of filling up the bathtub with dough and wallowing in it, but that too was not feasible, and besides, he thought it unsatisfactory. I want the right kind of dirt, namely carrion. Anything else would simply increase my desire for carrion. In this distress, he once made a full confession to his mother, and she decided to help him. She proposed that he use a dead chicken and gave him one. It was put in a box in the closet, and I hoped it would soon decay and get the right odor. In order to hurry it, I mutilated the body and enjoyed the job very much. Wherever I went and whatever I did, I had a lingering impression of the odor, which, while it pleased me, made me afraid that I would be discovered. As to his sexual activities, the patient stated that he accidentally discovered masturbation at the age of 12 and found that it relieved him from the desire for carrion. He soon discovered, however, that masturbation was wrong, that it weakened, etc., and gave it up. He never had any desire for coitus. He could not grasp it at all emotionally. When his favorite sister discovered his horrible secret, she got the idea that all he needed was sex, and in order to cure him, she offered herself to him. It was a failure. The same thing happened when both a doctor and a friend to whom he confessed his perversion induced him to try a prostitute. What he actually craved was not genitality, but gratification of the olfactory, gustatory, and tactile senses. Instead of the normal integration of the senses, through partial repression and subjugation of the rest to the primacy of the genital, the various senses here remained more or less on a childish level and functioned to a large degree independently, the sense of smell predominating. The patient remained polymorphous perverse. He was largely dominated by his infantile sexuality. However, he did make a strong effort towards object love, as I could readily see. Clinically, this patient could be designated as a case of necrophilia. And the two films are called A Life and Life Without Death. My piece is called Life Without Life. The camels are more human. A particular event in Frank Cole's life serves as the impetus for two films, A Life and Life Without Death. This event, despite being repeatedly referred to and depicted in both documentary and allegorical symbolic fashion, remains sketchy as the biblical episode of Isaac and Abraham, which it inverts. At his beloved grandfather's deathbed, Cole briefly entertains the possibility that he would like to switch places, that he would sacrifice his life to save his grandfather's. This thought so unsettles Cole, he declares he must never die. How unsettling is this as a primal scene? The camera is already there, set up squarely at the foot of his grandfather's bed, pointing slightly upward so as to include the standing Cole, who splits his gaze between his grandfather and the camera. But Cole's camera is always already there, anticipating every image, like Kubik's camera. It isn't there to record or to determine any kind of outcome or meaning, but to witness with an unflinching blankness the vaguely diabolical anticipation of an unconcerned participant. God called on Abraham to sacrifice Isaac, but it was only a test. Kierkegaard, in the Exordium to Fear and Trembling, retells the story in 4 versions. 1, Abraham turns wildly to Isaac and claims that it is his desire and not God's to kill him. Isaac pleads to God for mercy and is spared. Abraham claims it is better that he believes me a monster than he should lose faith in you, God. 2, Abraham is about to sacrifice Isaac, but then sees the ram God has left as a substitute and slaughters that instead. From that day henceforth, Abraham was old. He could not forget that God had ordered him to do this. Isaac flourished as before, but Abraham's eyes were darkened, and he saw joy no more. 3, Abraham begs God's forgiveness and the very fact that he'd be willing to sacrifice his son. 4, Isaac sees Abraham draw the knife, and at that moment loses faith. Not a word is ever said of this in the world, and Isaac never talked to anyone about what he had seen, and Abraham did not expect that anyone had seen it. So let's say Cole is Abraham, and his grandfather is Isaac. God, of course, is the camera. After Kierkegaard, we could expand and interpret Cole's primal scene in various ways, but I found only one terribly convincing. A young man stands astride his beloved grandfather's deathbed. He imagines that if he could sacrifice himself and die in place of his grandfather, he would. He's immediately horrified by his willingness to sacrifice himself and vows to embrace life, a life without death. However, to embrace this life without death, He must first turn his back on his grandfather and disavow the potentially sacrificial love he had for him. At the risk of sounding trite, life without death is also life without life, though Cole remains oblivious to this fact and is doomed to blankly, unknowingly diminish life. Cole's films are shaped as quests for greater self-understanding, though it is clear that none is really sought. Even the slightest glimmer of self-knowledge will not break through Cole's determination to survive himself. How could it? A death's drive is narcissistically driven as this doesn't leave room for hobbies. His is a quest away from subjectivity, away from life, away from love, other possibilities, spiritual quest, geopolitical mapping, some kind of cross-cultural or even cross-species understanding. Well, that just doesn't happen. He goes through camels like tissues. I'm exaggerating, actually he goes through camels like handkerchiefs. There is a type of purity here, a cinematic purity beyond, say, Herzog. The purity comes from an almost complete abnegation. These films are blinkered to everything but Cole's radiantly mute and narcissistic death drive. The images are blanks without any interiority or master narratives. The end of Life Without Death, when Cole has accomplished his quest and sits on the beach looking at the sea, would be even more hollowly anticlimactic were it not for our foreknowledge that his unacknowledged but painfully obvious quest for death succeeded in his subsequent Saharan holiday. He took his second trip and died on his second trip. But how beautiful are his images? How beautiful are his images of desiccated corpses? They are the only thing he will vacate the shot for. Film is for fetishism, video narcissism. That's just the way it is, at least the way it used to be. Fetishism requires some kind of scene, room to move about, yearning over time, a shape to the ceremonies, bodies, objects, transformation. There's just no room for any of that in video. In video, you can look at yourself, whisper to yourself, lulled into a steady state feedback loop. Cole brings the narcissistic interiority of video to film as he demonstrates that narcissism survives filmic death, is stronger than death. The dead animals are fetishes. They are film. Every image, roughly speaking, is either a Cole image or a corpse image, which is to say, all the images are of a piece. But the audio, Cole's audio is decidedly filmic. The sounds are so very far away from the images. I'm always disturbed by the use of Foleyed audio in otherwise documentary film. I wish it were inverted. I wish we listened to the world and made up whatever images we wished. Foley, it's two guys stand in a little closet manipulating rattles and bits of metal. They look through the little window and crumple paper as, on the large silent screen, villages burn. Cole's sparse deployment of audio is as masterful, as formally tight as his use of the film medium. He's really, I may have failed to mention, quite good. His use of Foleyed sound is judicious, except for one sequence, the makeshift surgery in the sedan. I take this sequence to be significant. Certainly it is an anomaly in an otherwise tight film. It is the only sustained sequence that has neither Cole images nor corpse images. But it does have images of a cesarean section, kind of inverted corpse image, accompanied by ridiculously intrusive sounds of wet sucking and sloshing. The overly loud sounds break the documentary veracity of what otherwise would have been a viscerally intense scene. This grotesque folly betrays a comically sadistic view of reproduction.